Welcome to the Week 3 Trauma Sensitive Schools vlog, part 1. For my journal, I decided to do a video in combination with a KWL chart just because I think better when I can talk things out, and honestly, this was inspired by Captain Kirk's Starship Enterprise blog entries, the captain's blog. So this is the Crain captain's blog. I want to start talking about kind of go through the KWL, and while going through this, there are several things that stood out in the chapters for me this week in terms of a trauma-informed approach in school and how to transition to it. So I want to start off with what I know. I knew coming in that trauma-informed schools and approaches, this is necessary and it's important. I know that my students can benefit from my diligence in trauma-informed practices, that safe spaces building community are key not only in the classroom, but also in the school as well. These were just kind of some basic things that I already knew. I recognized that this was needed, but the implementation and I guess the nitty-gritties, if you will, was really what I wanted to dive deeper in this year. So, or this week for this journal. So, what I wanted to know, I'm just going to list off some things and then talk about it in my journal entry. I feel like this is really, it's really reflective. So what I want to know are tried and true methods of implementation. So schools that have been successful in implementing trauma-informed approaches on a school-wide level, how did schools go about implementing that? Was this an all of a sudden kind of thing? Was this overnight? They just decided they're going to be trauma-informed. Did they take a year to implement this? Was this a slow over 5-year process? They did one thing and then another and then another. And this was something that was touched on in our book by Forbes and Sporleader. So I was really happy to hear about that. They talked about how they took a year to plan, and then second year and start getting people in the mind frame. And then the second year they were prepared to come in and start with these practices. I also wanted to know how to best manage time to accomplish everything. I know as a teacher, I already really struggle with time management, and it's because I recognize that my kids have a deficit in something, and I'm like, oh, we need to do this in the classroom in order to solidify that, to hit that home or whatever. And I look at, okay, then adding a social and development, a social and emotional curriculum in combination with the academics. And I'm like, that's the first thing my mind thinks of. How are we gonna have time? Where do we get the time? Maybe what I want to know is, are these schools implementing certain time management techniques for their teachers in their classroom and for their for their school as a whole? The other thing is best practices for building community among staff. The big thing that Forbes and Sporleader are talking about in this book, right, is buy-in. And the page, I think it's the start of chapter 6. So I was not prepared to get there quite yet. But it talks about buy-in and working as a team. It was saying that 100% is obviously ideal, but I believe ideally you want 100% of your staff on board. However, the reality is that typically is not the case. And I believe it went on to say that as long as you have like 80% of your staff on board when you start, this is on page 54 in chapter 6, that the rest will follow. They'll either fall in line, they'll either drop off, and they were also saying that those people are often your biggest advocates in the end, which is really cool. I like success stories like that. The other thing that I wanted to know, there were 2 other things that I wanted to point out, was resiliency building techniques. So I recognize that resiliency is super important, especially among trauma-informed kids. that resiliency is one of the top factors of if they can break the cycle of trauma and abuse and neglect and all of that in their lives. And so, are there specific techniques or are there specific curriculums or agendas that teachers can have that are all encompassing that helps to really build resiliency in their students? And then the other thing is, when I was watching the video, this week's video about the school, Fall Hamilton Elementary, the video from Edutopia, they were interviewing their trauma-informed practitioner, and she was saying that she was brought in to play an important role to increase awareness and knowledge, to increase practices in schools. So, first of all, my first thought was, well, did she go to school for that? Is that a degree? How does one become a trauma-informed practitioner? Are we certified trauma-informed practitioners when we're done with this? When we're done with this program? Like, how does one get into that? How do you find somebody that is like that? Because that to me was like, this is a very important role. Like, almost like they would be the pinnacle of the wheel hub, and they would kind of really be helping to direct everything else going around it, right? And so how schools are implementing this with or without that position, that was another thing that really stuck out to me. So those are a lot of my wonders for this week. Specifically, what I learned. There were several key details that majorly stood out to me this week that honestly rocked my world, because I am a third-year teacher, and my classroom is not as stable of an environment as I would like. And what I mean by that is I really believe that teachers are like the thermostats in their classroom. And this is something I'm working on in my personal life, is being just more balanced in general and being more even keel. That's definitely not, I was a theater major in college. That was not something that I very much kind of ride the wave of my emotions, which again is something that I'm working on being more diligent on in my personal life as well. But what I'm observing is that my classroom can very much be like camp, like where we're having fun and we're doing all this crazy stuff, and I'm like, and we're laughing and it's awesome. And then I can also, like, Thor's hammer just came down and it's done. And it gets real serious, and so I've noticed that it can be from one extreme to the other. And for some kids, that's great because they're getting the best of both worlds. For some kids, they like camp better, obviously. For some kids, they like Thor's hammer environment better. They respond much better to that. And so one of the things I've been working on this year is having really clear objectives and organization, which helps, again, as a teacher, just be more steady. So one of the things, and the reason I bring all this up is because of the zero tolerance policy. There are some things that I have a zero tolerance policy for, and I'm realizing it's not that black and white. It's not that simple. Especially, I'm a third grade teacher, and so kids that age, we expect them to be like little adults and have everything. I've worked with kids for a long time, and so what I've always said is kids behave at the level that you expect them to, or they're capable of. Basically, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think they can do something, kids will rise to the occasion, and oftentimes they will. And but also with that, we have to honor the fact that they are still children. And so zero tolerance policies, this quote on page, it was in chapter 4, the first page 31, it's rocked my world. Zero tolerance policy is actually a zero relationship policy. And along with that, the single most important variable, which we see on page, this is mentioned on page 36, is the single most important variable for people that have students who survive trauma is they are connected to a caring adult who believe in and cared about them. And so when I think about how I would introduce this to a school in transition, is I would start with that. Zero tolerance policy is thrown out because that's zero relationship. And in order to have any change, in order to break these cycles, in order to make a difference, you have to have relationship. That is proven. I mean, this is one of 8 sources that we've read so far in our program. The other thing is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs plenty of times before, but it really hit home that it is a necessity for you to have the academic component and the social emotional component of a classroom. That the very thing that we think, because I told you my first thought was, oh my gosh, how are we going to have time for everything? So the very thing that we think is so scary that's going to take away from the standards, the academics, is actually the very thing that may help enhance students' ability to grasp a hold of those standards and academics. The other thing is resiliency is paramount to success. And that wasn't a direct quote out of the book, but chapter 5 is all about resiliency. And the American Psychological Association defines resiliency as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, and tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems. So that is defined in our book by Forbes and Sport Leader on page 41. Resiliency, I am starting to really realize is such an undervalued skill in people in general. Like, we just don't really, we look at the success story later, like the movie Remember the Titans, and we're like, wow, that's awesome. But it took so many things in between, the start and the finish in order to have that arc, to see that success in that person. And I think teachers so often, don't realize the part. I think my observation is teachers are so overwhelmed that they generally just don't see that. They don't see the need for nurturing the whole person. And so this has really, really, really captivated my attention, the idea of resiliency and how we can help students become more resilient. Trauma-informed practices and increasing awareness and knowledge to increase understanding in schools. So that kind of leads me to page 43, which talks about protective factors that promote resilience, external factors and internal factors. I really believe that this specific person, we had to fill out who we would want on our staff, and I wish I had put this person on my list because I really believe that that person could be, like I said, is the pinnacle person to keep the wheel rolling. And really, they understand the ins and the outs of how implementing a new structure and really recreating the environment and the community of your school, how that's supposed to go. They understand the challenges you might face with staff who are not totally bought in. They might understand how to correct that, how to help that, how to encourage that. In conclusion, this week for the Week 3 Trauma Sensitive Schools Journal Part 1, I learned a lot about the importance of changing my own styles and my own ideas in my head of how things have gone, how I interacted with teachers, and how if I were to change a school to be more trauma-informed, have a more trauma-informed approach, that it would need to be more encompassing and more appreciative of those kids that have been through trauma. And the other thing that was really profound to me is that you can use these tools, this research, this information with any student. So just if it's beneficial for those students that have had experienced trauma and have a high ACEs, then it's going to be great for those that haven't. And so there really is no reason to not implement this approach. And I also realized this week how important it is for the tribe that you have around you. that that specific group of people that you have, that you're going to walk into this project, that you're going to walk into this commitment with, is so important. That people are bought in, they believe in the goal, they believe in the ideal, they believe in the mission of what you're trying to do and what you're going to do in this school, and they are going to run with it, because it really isn't a principal effort, it's not a psychologist's effort, it is every single human being that steps foot through those doors has agreed, and they are decided, they have a decided heart that they're going to impact those kids in a positive way using trauma-informed approaches. So thank you so much.